Hello and welcome to episode number 206. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com and I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is a premium episode, reserved for our premium members, which means that because you're listening to it, you are a premium member and you have therefore been entered into our book giveaway. Because I'm once again joined by Todd Williams, author of the book Rescue the Problem Project, a complete guide to identifying, preventing and recovering from project failure. In our last interview, Todd gave us an overview of the processes, tools and techniques that he recommends for rescuing problem projects. But as our next step, we want to hear from Todd how he ensures that projects don't get into trouble in the first place. And now, without further ado, how's your project doing? Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview.
Today with Todd Williams, president of eCameron Incorporated, author and speaker on Project Turnaround.
Welcome back to the PMI Global Congress here in beautiful Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. Once again, with me is Todd Williams. Hello, Todd.
Good afternoon, Cornelius. How are you?
Very well, thank you. We are still talking about or around your book, Rescue the Problem Project, a complete guide to identifying, preventing and recovering from project failure. At the end of the last interview, I asked you for a few recommendations on what our listeners can do, to prevent project failure, 3 things that they could do. And what we want to do now is we want to get more in depth into the how of doing this. So I'm proposing a hypothetical situation. I have a highly visible project that I'm running in my organization. I'm the sponsor, CEO, some kind of a C-level executive, and I'm bringing you in as a management consultant to look at this project. I have a feeling, everything's going well, everything's going okay. It's just, a little bit of a gut feeling something might be off, and I want to bring you in to identify any possible problems and to help the project team prevent failure. So now it's all up to you, Todd. Where do we start? What do we do? How do we go about doing this?
I've got really bad news for you, Cornelius.
Oh, God, no, please.
Yeah, if you're looking at this and the project started, you're too late. And I can't stress that enough. This is something, when you look at failed projects, they're really a manifestation of all the ills in the organization. If you have started the project, you've already embedded all those ills. You really need to address having a successful project long before the project actually starts. So if you look at this, there's 2 different ways you can do it. One is to capitalize on a failure you've had before, because most likely there has been a failure you've had before, and to take that failure and now what are my lessons learned? And not just a retrospective, because the retrospectives, lessons learned, postmortems, whatever you want to call them, too many times people do those, write the report, and the report ends up in some file cabinet or on some shelf, and it's not even worth a paperweight at that point. It just is not looked at. Take a look at where the problems have been and drill all the way down to actually fix the problem. Now, let me give you an example. I work on a number of projects where I have the wrong skill set on the team. And it always baffles me, why did you take a person who doesn't know how to do this task and put them on this task and expect the project to succeed? And people come back to me and say, oh, well, we'll do some on-the-job training, good old OJT. And I kind of look at them and say, well, can you show me in the budget where you have extra money allotted for this OJT that you're doing?
I see where you're going.
And they say, well, no. Well,
that's on-the-job training. I don't need budget.
I need budget because he or she is going to take longer to actually ramp up to speed. We've got to have that training. It just doesn't materialize magically. Boom, they have the knowledge. So good intentions to get this person into the right skill set and all that, but you didn't budget for it. So now your project, it looks red or in trouble because you all of a sudden have this big financial spend and things are dragging out in this given area. So instead, what you need to do is have the right team to begin with, or the right resources in general, meaning you have the money to accommodate people getting trained on things. So I see this all the time. One company, they put a whole bunch of people on the project, probably half the team didn't have the correct skill set. And the reason they didn't was because the company had a philosophy that I'm going to deploy all of our people onto a project and make them billable before I bring in any contractors, because a contractor would displace an employee. And it sounds wonderful for the employees, right? It's employee first and really has the heart for the employee. But when I asked the question, did you train your people to the strategic roadmap of the company? All I got back was blank stares and the sound of crickets. And we sat down and said, okay, here's the problem. We need to have this training. Now, what is your strategic roadmap? More crickets. And so we had to go all the way back to they didn't have a strategic roadmap for what they were really trying to achieve in this professional services group. So therefore, they didn't know what training to provide, and therefore they didn't even know where they were going. So we actually drove them down to a point of saying, you need to have a strategic roadmap. So when you asked me and you called me in as the executive, you can see where I would say it's too late. Because if you didn't have the strategic roadmap and this project's already running, I don't even know if that project is on your roadmap. So that's one of the very first few things that I ask is, where is this thing going? So make sure that that project is on that roadmap. Whenever we were talking earlier in the previous episode, I mentioned listen. That's part of what people have to do is listen. Listen, what is it that we're trying to achieve, right? So where is the company going?
When you say listen, you're talking about yourself as the person trying to identify whether there is a problem on the project, or me as the executive?
You as the executive, the project manager as the person who's running the project, listen to what the executive is asking for, looking at what this project is trying to do, and saying, hey boss, these don't align. We're going left and everything else is going right. So how does this all work? And ask those critical questions. And then, of course, the executive has to listen to the project manager asking those questions and not just say, oh, well, you're just a project manager, I'm an executive, right? That doesn't work. So people have to listen, this whole communication thing. And people say communication, and I turn that around to listen, because communication is too big. Communication is, delivery and reception and all this stuff. And if you just listen, communication happens. If you just listen, okay? And you'll hear what people say, you hear how they interpret things that you say. It's focusing on that.
Okay. What I've heard you say so far is we're very high on a strategic level, right? So it seems to me that the first thing you do is you look at the strategy. Is this project aligned with the corporate strategy? Do you even know where your strategy is taking you? Now, do you take it further down then? Do you drill down into the tactical areas and you look at the various tactical areas?
Yes. In general, that strategic question for probably 75% of the projects is a 15 to 20 to 30 minute conversation. Yes, this is why we're doing the project. It goes here, it goes there, it does this, it does that. And you get the lay of the land. Then you just start peeling the onion and getting down toward the core of trying to figure out what's wrong. So the next thing to do is to pull the contracts, statements of work, change requests.
Do you have a checklist that you go through, or a process?
I do have a process that I go through. So once that realization has happened and somebody's called me, and that's the biggest step. I cannot stress enough that if somebody doesn't call, there is no problem. then the actual audit itself is the next step. So we go audit, then we analyze, then we negotiate a new solution and execute. That audit step is a very, very objective, non-judgmental review of the entire project. Contract, statement of work, change requests. You talk to everybody on the project trying to figure out what they thought the intent of the project was, where they were going, their part. Start writing all that down and looking for all the disconnects and looking for the things that are, this is out over here. Or I had a project where I would ask the question, who is the end user? And I got 4 answers. That kind of starts pointing you toward maybe a problem. If you don't know who your end user is, then what are you really building, right? So sometimes you can ask some of the simplest questions and you start landing right on top of where the problem is. And the minute I asked that question of who is the end user, and I was getting different answers, I knew I was probably getting fairly close to the issue. Sometimes on some projects, you have to drill all the way down to the technical level. So you're reading design specifications, you're looking at the functionality of hardware, software, how an actual implementation is going to work, and seeing how things line up. It depends on the company. If the executives are in the engineering realm, you're more likely going to address it at a technical level with them and say some piece of software or some piece of hardware has, five innies and there's only 4 outies coming from something else. Okay,
Something's missing,
right? And boil it down to relatively simple terms. And I do use innies and outies a fair amount to describe this, so people don't start arguing about what type of interface it is. Because you get drugged down that route. So it really depends on how far you drill down, depends on the attitude of the people you're trying to address. If we're working with a highly technical company, highly technical C-level executives that you're dealing with, you better be technical. If you're talking about just straight business people, you can leave the technical stuff out of there and say, here's my scope, my schedule, my budget, here's what the customer thinks value is, and we're missing these pieces here.
Right, you're adjusting your communication to the needs of the people you're talking with.
100%,
Obviously.
like we do in real life everywhere.
Yeah. Did I get this right? We start out with an audit and then we analyze the results.
Yes.
Okay, let's come back to that really, really bad word, audit. People don't like that word. What do you do about that? Do you call it by a different name and still do it?
No, I still call it an audit. And whenever people get down to that point of saying, oh my goodness, it's an audit, I say, so can we get the CFO in here? And let's see if he has that same reaction whenever I say audit. Because the financial group of any corporation has an audit quarterly, most of them quarterly, definitely yearly. I mean, maybe in the last few years if they've...
Monthly?
Yeah, daily in some, I don't know. I mean, it gets pretty bad, but they're used to that audit. It's not really a dirty word, right? They know that when the audit goes on, there's going to be a bunch of work that comes out of it, but it's not a negative thing. The audit's not trying to find fault. The audit is trying to find, here's areas we need to work on. So it's a very positive thing when you talk about a financial audit. Some financial executives might disagree with me on that one, but it is a positive thing. People think audit in other areas, and they start thinking something, here in the US, they start thinking about the IRS coming after you and doing an audit, which is a very negative thing, right? So yes, that connotation is there. I still use the word, and I turn right around and I make the analogy to the finance world. And saying, in finance, audit's not a dirty word. It's a way of life.
Okay, so we've done the audit, we've analyzed it, we've figured out a few areas. We're now done with sort of the identifying portion of this approach. Now we have to move forward and we want to ensure that our project doesn't fail. So we're getting into prevention. What are we doing here?
So from that audit and analysis, you actually find out what in the organization is wrong, right? So that's the gold that you can find in a failed project. If you are looking at how do I've had a series of failed projects in the past, I've fixed a number of things. Now, how do I minimize my chances of failure in the upcoming cycle of projects that I need to do? There's really quite a number of things that you can do. First and foremost, have the right team. Do not skimp on the team. Everybody wants to, I think I mentioned it a couple times, bring in, let's go reuse our staff, this is a great team over here on that project, so we'll put them together on this project.
Right. I mean, that was the first thing you talked about. Make sure that the people you have on your team have the right skills.
That is so beyond
going forward. Preventing you wouldn't leave people who don't have the right skills on the project.
Correct.
Right.
That's paramount. The next one is the methodology you're using. Okay. Do you need to have a very heavy methodology? Can you go with a very light methodology? Can it be something like waterfall? Should it be something like agile? Can you mix the two? I'm not bashful at all about taking a project that by all means is a waterfall style project and really should be, and looking at the components inside that project and say, well, just a minute, we've got one other piece here we don't know a bloody thing about. It's all innovative, it's all new, and the customer really can't define it for me. Okay, let's run the rest of this project in a waterfall set, and now let's take this sub-project and let's break out this little chunk, and we'll run that as an agile project to get to where we need to go and figure out how we're going to get this other piece in here. And people are very scared to do that. They don't like the idea of mixing methodologies. So I will mix methodologies in a project. I will do that in a recovery and take the best of breed out of various and sundry methodologies to actually pull things together and make a successful project. I have organizations that insist that they're always going to be absolutely everything is waterfall or everything is agile. And I draw the analogy to a IT shop. An IT shop has everything from computer refreshes and pulling network wire to building brand new software. And you're not going to do a network pull on an agile basis. I'm not going to pull it some direction and say, well, do you think the customer likes that? Oh, no, it isn't. Then we'll pull it back and we'll pull it some other way. You don't do that. You get your permits, you do the cable trays, you pull the cable. It's you know where you're going, and it's got endpoints, right? At the same time, you don't write a 500-page functional specification for some product, be it hardware or software, that the customer really doesn't have an idea what it is. You won't get 500 pages out of it,
Yes.
right? So you can't use one methodology. You have to have a portfolio of processes for a portfolio of projects. The other then is to make sure you start the project out right. And if you think about how project inception normally happens, you have some customer who sat back, they've been working on an idea that they want to have something built. Maybe it's a new voltmeter or a new medical device, and they spend months, maybe even years, getting this concept of what it is that they want to build. They put together an RFP, they put together the information they need, they let out a contract, and then all of a sudden, boom, the person who's going to be supplying this, be it internal or external, has a project to run. Well, it's been going. This isn't project inception at this point. This is project birth. Inception happened a long, long time ago. After that came conception, and then there was this big gestation period, and now we're really starting things at the birth. So you need to get the type of people who are going to work on the delivery involved very early on, back at the inception and conception stage of that project. That way you get that realism instilled there, so you don't have people who are designing things that really can't be built or thought of. And sometimes it just takes the smallest little tweak, and you can take something that was extremely difficult to do and make it really easy to do. But if you do that too late, then the project doesn't start out right. So you've got to make sure that whole lead-in is correct and that you maintain alignment. One of the things I hear from people all the time is the customer has too high of an expectation. And that drives me nuts, because expectations should be high. That's how we go someplace. Look at Apple. Expectations are always high and they always meet it. The issue is they maintain alignment on the expectations. And if you know the expectations are low, and you both think they're going to be low, you have a better chance of success. If you think that they're going to be really high, then everybody understands that there is a really high bar that we have to go over, and they understand the risk and they're working along together. So keeping that project inception, keeping the alignment throughout there is very critical. And there is some basic processes that have to be in there that I see fail on many projects, such as just the basic communication of what went on in meetings, change requests, meeting minutes, risk registers, keeping some of these basic core processes in place, very, very critical. And they exist everywhere. When people talk about Agile, they get all upset because Agile doesn't have a change management process, and I turn around and tell them it's the strongest change management process that I've ever seen. So try to explain that to them and get them down that route, that if you don't have something like that, that you're going to fail. And those are the big bullets that I would get people to go after. And that's a big set of things. That's a huge set of things for people to look at.
Absolutely. what would you recommend to our listeners? The one thing that the project managers who listen to us right now, who have ongoing projects and they feel, hey, my project is not in trouble at all. What's the one thing they should be doing tomorrow? And just, think through on their projects to identify if they really are okay or if there might be something slightly off.
The only place where I've seen that project managers didn't know that their project was in trouble and their project really was in trouble was because they were too removed from their team. And there's 4 tenets that I put out there about what a project manager or recovery manager should have. And this is tenet number 2, and that is that you have to stay involved with the team. If you're imperious, you're in your cubicle, you're in your office, you're out talking to the executives, and you want to be in with the big execs and going that direction, you're losing track of the people on your team. You need to not be facing your executives. You need to be facing your team. You need to be working with them on a day-to-day basis. So if you even start to ask yourself some of those questions, I'd be really nervous. And I would be getting out there with the team, having lunch with them, figuring out how to help them out, actually roll up your sleeves, help them do work, do testing, review documentation, be involved with what they're doing so that they have the trust to say, hey, I don't think this is going to work, and we're going to have to go move things here and move things there. And that's where you start hearing those hints. Step over the line that's next to you, the leads, and talk to the people doing the work. If you hear a question, there is a question, a big one.
Excellent. Those of you who want to hear more about identifying, preventing, and recovering from project failure, pick up Todd's book called Rescue the Problem Project, about 300 pages thick, from AMACOM, the American Management Association. Difficult word. Todd, thank you very much for being here and once again spending a few moments with me and my listeners. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Welcome to your listeners, and thank you to you and your listeners.
And that was Todd Williams, helping us to understand how we can keep and steer projects out of trouble. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a PMP or PGMP and you're looking for a simple and effective way to earn your PDUs, then try the PDU podcast. Get a new webinar and at least one new PDU every month on autopilot. Stop by at pducast.com. That's pducast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. Project management will become a recognized profession when jokes are made about the practitioners. Oops. Until next time.